Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing the reviews of the final 3 books that I read for the first round of SPFBOX, and I will be officially announcing to you the book that I'm nominating as my semi-finalist out of the 10 books that I read. So I have already done other reviews that have included all of the previous books that I've talked about, and I will leave those linked in the description. And if you've already watched those videos and you're all up to date, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. But now is time for the final decision, because if you have watched those other review videos, you know that I've had a couple of books already that I've really enjoyed that have been strong contenders, but you never know, because it could always be another book among those final ones that really just comes in and becomes my favorite. So with that being said, the final 3 books that I read for this round were A Contract in Sol Forne by Alain Marché and Christopher Warman, Odd and Ed by Shanti Leonard, and then A Rose Among Thorns by Ash Fitzsimmons. So these were all the shortest books of the bunch, and to be honest, I got through these quite quickly and they were kind of a whirlwind. But as I always do, I will just get right into them and give you the breakdown of my ratings of each category and everything as I go through each book. So the first one of these 3 books that I read was A Contract in Sol Forne, and this was a premise that I was very intrigued by, because our basic idea for the book is that we have a djinn named Valen who is as old as the world itself, and for a long time has been trapped and bound to an object that makes her a djinn, in terms of like people being able to form a contract with her and her being compelled to complete it, like magically compelled, and she isn't really free. And she has been on a quest for a long time to find a particular object with enough power to set her free, and she thinks that she's getting very close on her journey to find this object. Now on the other hand, we have a young boy, a 16-year-old boy named Doravan, who is a little bit down on his luck, because him and his sister essentially used to come from a noble family. His father was awarded like a house title and lands for essentially valor in war, but his parents passed away when he was very young, and then their uncle, whom everything passed to, kind of squandered it away. And so Doravan and his sister live as, I guess, like the peasant lifestyle now, but he still has a lot of personal pride when it comes to feeling that he comes from a noble line, and he is looking for a way to make his way in the world. So my ratings ended up averaging out to a 6.00, or exactly a 3-star for A Contract in Sol Forne. And I gave the characters in this book a 7, and this was essentially a case for me of one character falling very high on the scale and one character falling very low on the scale, because if we were just talking about Valen, I would give her character like a 9 or something like that. And if we were just talking about Doravan, I would give his character like a 5. I hated him. But that's not to say that that's entirely like bad writing or anything, because you are definitely meant to feel like the pettiness and the jealousy and the immaturity coming through with Doravan. He's a very frustrating character to read. I think that's what got to me, is that I didn't feel like he had the ability in the writing to make good choices, and then he does something that made me pretty unable to forgive him. And it involved Valen, and the start of the book was mostly just following Valen, and I was very intrigued and invested in that early portion. And then it waned a little bit when we started following Doravan more, because I just largely wasn't interested. So that's where like the characters get a 7, just because like one perspective I was really enjoying and one perspective I was very much not enjoying. And the plot in this book I gave a 5, because I definitely had an idea at the beginning when I was feeling very compelled of where we were going, and then as we got further in, I kind of felt like there wasn't a clear like motive and a clear image. Like one of our characters had one, but the other character didn't, and then the way that the secondary character got involved in the primary motive felt kind of contrived to me, and it fell in with that thing earlier that I was mentioning that Dorovan did that I found to be like extremely uncomfortable to read in terms of the real world like comparison and connotation that it has, and that is mentioned in the book, so like it is recognized, but for me it just felt not very well crafted, I guess. Like the plot was okay, but it wasn't as strong or as interesting as I was hoping based on the beginning of the book, and so by the end I just ended up feeling like extremely average about it. I gave the world building, the writing, and the enjoyment all a 6 for this book, so you can look at that as a 3-star, of course, in terms of the fact that all of them I thought were good, but I did end up leaving this book feeling sort of let down in the sense that I never was able to, past that beginning, stay invested and feel connected and feel like I really cared. It wasn't anything really terrible about it. It was just that by the end, I felt like I was just reading it to finish it. And there were some good scenes, there were some moments that felt like they should have had more impact that didn't hit as hard because I wasn't connected to the characters and stuff. So it was, in the end, kind of just like a bit of fun, and then it ended up not completely working out for me. Now, I do think that, in all fairness, enjoyment of this book, like if you're thinking that you're interested in it, would hinge greatly on how you feel about Dorovan's character. Valen, I don't think is as polarizing of a character. I think that she has the intrigue that comes along with a character being ancient and having a lot of secrets that can be revealed to us. To me, that's always very interesting to read, but a younger character who could be considered annoying but is going to go through some growth, it could be very hit or miss in my opinion. Like, I don't want to spoil any other book series, but the way that I was thinking about it in my head was that the character in this novel felt like some characters from other series that I've read that have started off like that, but have had books and books to grow, whereas it felt like we were supposed to get to that end point with this character in this book within like 150 pages, and it just wasn't enough for that to be believable for me, so it just felt a little bit flat. So I think that if that character ends up working for you, I think that would be a huge hinge for the enjoyment of this book, but all in all, I found it to be pretty middle of the road, and we'll move on. Next up, we had Odd and Ed by Shanti Leonard, and this one, unfortunately, aside from the book that I DNF'd, was my least favorite of the bunch. Odd and Ed was a very strange little book because it is quite short. I was able to read it in a day/one sitting, which is why it was easy for me to finish it. And like if it was a huge chunky book, I would have considered DNFing it, but it wasn't hard to get through. It was more about the content and just not meshing with me, which is really interesting because in a very real way, I feel like this can be compared to The Ocean at the End of the Lane, depending on who you are and how you had experienced The Ocean at the End of the Lane, because that is actually one of my favorite books of all time. But this deals with our two sibling main characters. We have Odd and we have Ed, and so when we first meet them, they're kind of trying to trick their cousin into believing that they have magical powers and that maybe he does too, and that's just sort of like a bit of childhood fun and stuff. But what we learn afterwards is that the house that they live in, Odd and Ed, genuinely does have something very strange about it. And Ed kind of has this way about him where he can usually calm down the house. But this time when he tries it, something is going wrong and he ends up in the house still physically, but his soul is outside of his body roaming around, and Odd spends the book kind of trying to find a way to put his soul back into his body, and she enlists the help of a very strange boy from her class because she thinks that based on what his family is like, he might know something about all of this soul stuff. And all of that premise sounds fine, and I thought going in that even if this book was strange, that I still had a high chance of liking it because of other things that I've liked in the past. And a great example of that, like I mentioned, is Ocean at the End of the Lane. But for me, I ended up giving this 2.5 stars or a 5 out of 10. And I think it wasn't the strangeness that got me, it was the specific subject matter and some of the things that ended up getting like a little bit ridiculous and over the top in my opinion. So I gave the characters a 6 because on the whole they weren't doing too much for me except for Odd. I actually did like Odd. I enjoyed her and I enjoyed following her, and I thought she was well written. But the rest of the characters weren't doing too much for me. The plot I gave a 5 because I can respect the fact that we had a clear goal from start to finish, but we did take some detours that I thought got quite off track for such a short book, and I would have, I think, been happier if we had spent more time with Ed, if we had spent more time exploring some of the lore and mystical stuff that was happening in a more whimsical way, whereas I feel like it went in a more grounded, gruesome, into the real world direction, which I think is the side of it that just doesn't work for me as well. And so I gave world building a 5 as well, just because I was hoping for, we got glimpses of more of the mystical, whimsical side of it, but I personally would have preferred a journey that just focused more on that instead of some of the gross, weird stuff that went on. Also, I apologize for not mentioning this earlier, but I think it's really important to mention that there are at least 2, possibly more, instances of animal abuse and animal cruelty in this book that are, if not described in moment, are quite graphic in their concept that is mentioned on page. And I was extremely grateful that I was the second person in our group to read this book because I was forewarned of its coming and I was able to skim those parts, and even skimming them, it made me sick to my stomach. So I think that it's really important to know that going into this book, and there probably should be like a content warning at the beginning. I personally fall on the side of that. I don't think that content warnings are spoilers. I know that there are instances when they can be, but I fully support the presence of like a list of them that you can either choose to look at or choose to not look at, because I'm not even necessarily someone who has a specific trigger. It's just that I love animals and I felt sick, so I didn't like that part. But the writing I gave a 6 because I definitely thought that the writing was good. There were parts of it that like the structural parts of it that I liked and that I thought were well done and well crafted, but writing also has to include like the entire structure and the pacing and stuff, and I didn't like love all of it. I just thought that it was good. And then for enjoyment, I gave it a 4. Part of it has to do with the animal stuff, but part of it has to do with the fact that, like, in the end, the level of weirdness just didn't work for me. And this honestly is quite a disappointment for me because, like I said before, I just thought there was a chance that this would be the right kind of weird for me and that I would actually really, really enjoy it. And unfortunately, that just didn't end up being the case. Now, even though it may not seem like it, and I might seem cruel and grumpy, I really hate giving negative reviews, so I am thankful to say that we can end on quite a high note with A Rose Among Thorns by Ash Fitzsimmons as a book that I personally really enjoyed. This one ended up getting 8.58 from me when you average out the scores, which is like a 4.25 stars, and this was just a really fun one. Very nice, quick, fun breath of fresh air to finish my reading on. And this essentially follows our main character, Rose, who is covering for her grandmother, or no, sorry, not her grandmother, her great aunt. Her great aunt basically owns a nursery and has just said like, hey, I'm going to visit a friend. I need you to cover for me for like this weekend or for a week or however long it exactly is. And so Rose comes and she just like takes care of the nursery. She is not great with plants, but it's just a temporary thing. So she's doing well enough on her own to like sell people flowers and plants and make sure that the store runs okay and doing the accounting books and stuff like that. But what Rose doesn't realize is that there was an inspection scheduled. And so an inspector shows up, and this inspector is distinctly magical in nature, and Rose was not aware whatsoever that her great aunt also ran out back of her human nursery a distinctly magical nursery. So it seems as though at first glance, her great aunt is on the run from this inspection because she grows highly regulated and highly like restricted magical plants that can be very dangerous, and you only can have them and grow them if you're licensed. So she has always in the past been fine, but it looks pretty bad that she has run away and skipped out on her inspection. But there's more to the mystery than meets the eye, which of course there is. So the inspector and Rose kind of have to investigate, run the shop while they figure out what's going on, and try and find Rose's aunt and see what the heck is going on here. So I gave the characters in this one an 8.5. I really enjoyed them. The banter and everything was just so fun because there was very much a dynamic of the inspector being like, well, you're a human, you can absolutely not be the person taking care of this shop, like you don't even know what you're in for or what you're getting into or anything like that. And Rose kind of being like, well, Aunt Lily left me in charge, so like tough luck, buddy. But then they eventually kind of start working together, and there are a few other side characters that we get to meet, but it's mostly a pretty small cast and a pretty small scope. And so it's mostly the two main characters, and I really liked both of them. The plot got an 8 from me because I feel like the plot, this is actually a really well balanced book for like plot versus characters, because there is a clear goal, and the goal is to solve the mystery, and they do absolutely by the end solve it, and it doesn't take that long because this is a very short book, but the characters are equally important to the plot, and so I gave the plot an 8 just because I thought that it was really strong, but I do think that like it wasn't necessarily the main focus, which is fine, but it was just enjoyable. And then world building, I gave an 8.5 as well. I think that it did a really good job of integrating magic into the real world, and kind of just a little snapshot of how it would work in this scenario. Like, the book didn't need a far-reaching, extremely detailed like explanation for every way in which magic can't be detected by humans, but it did do an impressive job of giving a lot of information about like the magical realm for such a short amount of pages, and I thought that it balanced it very well, where it didn't feel too exposition-y. It felt appropriate to whatever we were doing at the moment, but there was a lot that we learned, which was pretty cool. And then I also gave writing an 8.5 just because I don't know that there's necessarily anything over the top about it, but it was just the perfect writing for the story that was being told. It kind of walked the line between feeling more fantasy and feeling more like modern romance writing, and I thought that it was a really, really great balance to be struck, and it just worked perfectly for the story. And then I gave enjoyment a 9 because honestly, I just had so much fun with this one. It was over really quickly because I just tore through it, and I really liked it. I really had a good time. So, like I mentioned, this was a 4.25 star. Now, if you've been paying attention and keeping track, which obviously it's okay with if you haven't, but if you have, you may have noticed that that means that my ranking of my top 3 reads from this group of 10 puts The Oathsworn Legacy by K.R. Ganji at the top with a 4.5 star, and then we have A Rose Among Thorns by Ash Fitzsimmons and Oak King, Holly King by Sebastian Nothwell just coming in, or both coming in just below that at a 4.25 star. So in essence, those are my like podium, if you will, and The Oathsworn Legacy by K.R. Ganji is the semi-finalist nomination that I am going to give to Cassidy for her to choose between with all of the other semi-finalists. However, I just wanted to give a shout out and some more recognition to A Rose Among Thorns and Oak King, Holly King, because I did really love reading both of those as well. So if you were going to have a takeaway from my reviews, it would definitely be those 3 are my top recommends. And I also hope that if you're the type of person who is not deterred by a negative review, or not even a negative review, but a more average review, I really hope that some of the things that I've said about the other books have helped you to decide whether you should pick them up or not, and whether it would be up your alley. So that is it for this year's first round of SPFBOX, at least for me, and I will be eagerly awaiting Cassidy's choice to see how she enjoys what we have all given her as semi-finalists. And of course, I hope that she enjoys The Oathsworn Legacy since I'm recommending it, but at the same time, I'm really just looking forward to seeing what happens and what she thinks, and maybe I will decide to pick up some other books that I didn't have in my batch based on what Cassidy says about them, or someone else recommending them as their semi-finalist. So that is it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Please like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you'd like to see more from me. As always, I'll have my socials and Discord with Ben in the description if you're interested in any of that stuff, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!